Jasmine Crockett's use of mockery during her speech was intended to draw attention, to project dominance, and perhaps to diminish the presence of her opponent. In the world of political theater, moments like these are calculated. They're meant to evoke reactions, to go viral, to deliver a punchline that lands harder than any argument ever could. But something deeper happened beneath the surface of that moment. When mockery is used as a tactic, it tells you more about the person delivering it than the person it's aimed at. It's not just about what's being said, it's about why it's being said, and what insecurities, intentions, or emotions are driving it. Crockett's remarks, delivered with a tone laced in sarcasm, were aimed to belittle. The intention was clear: control the narrative by discrediting the other side in front of an audience. But mockery, for all its sharpness, is also a mirror. It reflects back to the audience not only the content of the attack, but the character of the one wielding it. It begs the question: what compels someone in a position of influence to resort to ridicule instead of reason? Why choose laughter over logic? When someone uses mockery, they usually believe they've found a weakness, something they can exploit for effect. But this assumption can backfire. The person being mocked doesn't need to respond with equal aggression. In fact, their silence or calm can create a contrast that's even more powerful than any retort. When Crockett made her jab, it wasn't met with a war of words. And that's exactly when her performance began to unravel. Because mockery without resistance doesn't build strength, it exposes fragility. There's something uncomfortable about watching someone try to perform power through mockery when the moment doesn't land. It creates a tension in the room, a shift in energy. What was supposed to feel like a triumphant jab instead becomes awkward, strained. The audience starts to wonder, was that necessary? Was it fair? Was it even smart? Mockery, when not grounded in truth or when used too liberally, turns into a spectacle. And in a setting where ideas should matter most, spectacle can quickly feel cheap. The use of derision also often ignores the weight of context. In public discourse, especially in political spaces, people carry stories that aren't visible on the surface. Their presence is built on history, on battles fought silently, on values passed down quietly. So when someone like Crockett chooses to target an individual through ridicule, she risks dismissing all that silent strength. It becomes not just an attack on one person, but a commentary on everything they represent. That's why mockery is so risky. It doesn't just miss the mark. It can alienate the very people you're trying to win over. And yet, in that moment, Crockett believed she had the upper hand. Her words were pointed, her tone confident. But mockery rarely creates lasting victories. It creates moments, quick bursts of noise that may grab attention, but fade fast when measured against grace, restraint, or quiet authority. The potency of a joke doesn't last when it's met with stillness. In fact, the silence that follows, mockery can become its own kind of judgment. It forces the audience to fill the void, to consider the weight of what's just been said, and whether it truly deserved to be said at all. The irony is that those who use mockery often do so from a place of fear, not power. Fear that their arguments won't hold without theatrics. Fear that they might be losing ground. Fear that they need to dominate instead of persuade. But the truly powerful don't need to humiliate to be heard. They let their ideas speak for themselves. They don't confuse applause with respect or laughter with legitimacy. So when Crockett reached for mockery, she might have thought she was being clever, assertive, in control. But what really happened was revealing. It showed a reliance on tactics over substance, on entertainment over dialogue. And in doing so, it inadvertently drew attention not to her target, but to herself, her approach, and the question of what kind of presence she wanted to be remembered for. Silence can be unsettling. In moments of high tension, people expect noise, clapping, shouting, arguments, rebuttals. It's the rhythm of confrontation. But sometimes what's not said carries more weight than what is. In the middle of a heated exchange where words are flying and postures are rigid, a simple act, one that breaks from the expected script, can send a ripple through the room. When someone rises without speaking, when they offer no rebuttal, no flash of outrage, no counterattack, it disrupts the energy. It forces attention. It demands respect, not through force, but through presence. This kind of silence doesn't signal retreat. It doesn't indicate weakness. On the contrary, it's a quiet assertion of authority. It says, I don't need to stoop to that level. It communicates a confidence so solid that it doesn't require validation from laughter or applause. In a setting where everyone is jostling to be heard, to dominate through noise, stillness becomes revolutionary. It throws off those who depend on chaos to win their battles. Silence, in this way, becomes a power move. In that particular moment, after the mocking words had been delivered, the atmosphere should have leaned toward retaliation. That's the expected move. Words were hurled with intent, meant to sting, meant to corner. And when there's no response, no fiery comeback or dramatic reaction, it shifts the narrative. The person who remains calm, who doesn't blink under scrutiny, controls the temperature of the room. They show that they're grounded, unbothered, and above the spectacle. The absence of a verbal response also highlights the emptiness of the mockery. It draws attention to how performative it all is. When someone tries to provoke and fails to trigger a reaction, the spotlight turns back on the provocateur. The silence functions as a mirror, reflecting the tone, the delivery, and even the intent of the original jab. Suddenly, the audience starts to see the difference between posturing and substance, and that realization lingers. Silence also gives space for others to reflect. It invites the room to fill in the blanks, to question what just happened, to assess the deeper implications. It's in those few seconds of stillness that people reconsider their allegiances. Did the mockery feel fair? Was it necessary? What does it say about the speaker who chose that path? These questions echo louder than any shouted defense could, and they come not because someone raised their voice, but because someone refused. It's often said that dignity doesn't need to announce itself. It walks into a room and makes its presence known without demanding attention. And when that dignity is tested, when it's challenged by mockery or ridicule, its refusal to respond in kind becomes its strongest statement. That kind of restraint can shift a narrative more effectively than any counterpunch ever could. It shows discipline. It shows clarity. It shows that the individual is rooted in something deeper than momentary approval. There's also something universally human about the effect silence has in a charged moment. It's ancient, almost primal. It reminds people of their own inner stillness, their own capacity to remain unmoved in the face of disrespect. Silence, in this way, speaks to everyone in the room. It crosses political lines, personal biases, and tribal instincts. It doesn't ask for permission, it simply is. And while silence can be interpreted in many ways, in this moment, it wasn't passive. It wasn't avoidance. It was intentional. It was a conscious decision to reject the bait, to deny the moment its expected climax, to leave the audience with a lasting image not of two people shouting at each other, but of one standing with grace, allowing the words that came before to collapse under their own weight. In that quiet moment, the dynamics of power shifted. No need for retorts, no theatrics, just presence. An unwavering calm in the middle of performance. A reminder that control isn't always about volume. Sometimes the person who says nothing at all says the most. There are moments when words fail to capture the weight of what is being communicated. In these rare instances, actions, small, quiet, unassuming, speak volumes. They cut through the noise, through the clever insults and well-rehearsed sound, bites, and remind everyone in the room that meaning isn't always in what is said. It can live in a gesture, in presence, in the legacy that stands behind a person without needing explanation. That gesture, the simple act of standing, wasn't just a personal response. It was a statement rooted in something deeper than the moment at hand. It wasn't about protest, anger, or bravado. It was about representing the weight of history, of family, of everything that had led to that particular moment. There's a quiet strength in bearing the responsibility of legacy without turning it into a performance. Rising without spectacle, without fanfare, is often more impactful than raising a voice. Legacy doesn't need to be explained when it's lived. It's carried in posture, in principle, in the refusal to be moved by pettiness. It's in the way someone can rise to say, without speaking, I've seen more than this. I've endured more than this. I will not be diminished by this. The power of that moment wasn't just in the silence. It was in the unseen history that walked into the room with the person who stood. In many ways, that gesture served as a reminder that behind every person in public life, there are stories, sacrifices, and people who came before. There are values that were taught, lines that were drawn, and truths that were instilled long before the public ever took notice. And sometimes, in the heat of debate, in the theater of mockery and clashing egos, that history gets overlooked. But it doesn't disappear. It waits. It waits until a moment like this, when everything noisy falls flat, and a quiet action becomes the center of attention. That kind of presence doesn't demand the spotlight. It becomes the spotlight. Not because of force, but because of the undeniable authority that legacy provides. It changes the way the room feels. It turns what could have been just another political jab into something that asks people to look deeper, to think longer. It shifts focus from the moment to the meaning behind it. This is why legacy matters, not because it's a trophy or a talking point, but because it gives people the strength to rise without hesitation when something demands it. It's not just about bloodlines or family names. It's about values passed down, about understanding one's place in a bigger story. It's the sense of responsibility that says, I don't just stand for myself. I stand for everyone who helped shape who I am. And that, more than any speech, commands attention. In a world that prizes quick wit and social media moments, legacy can feel old-fashioned. But when someone carries it well, when they wear it not like armor but like memory, it becomes unshakable. It turns even the cruelest comment into background noise. It reminds everyone present that while words can be clever, they're not always lasting. What endures are the principles that are lived, the sacrifices made quietly, and the gestures that speak across generations. The image of someone standing in the middle of tension, offering no anger, just presence, becomes iconic not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. It's rooted. It doesn't waver. And for those watching, whether in the room or beyond, it's a call to remember what truly gives a person strength. It's not their ability to fight fire with fire, but their ability to stand firm with nothing but their history at their back. That history doesn't have to be explained. It doesn't ask for applause. It just exists, woven into every decision, every reaction, every quiet response to chaos. And in that one moment, when others expected confrontation, legacy stood up instead. And that was enough to shift the air in the room. In a culture obsessed with loud victories and dramatic takedowns, respect has become almost underrated. It's no longer the headline, no longer the thing that draws clicks or applause. Yet, when it enters a room, especially at a moment when things are teetering on the edge of spectacle, it stops everything. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't come with fanfare. It simply appears, and in doing so, it reminds people of what they forgot they were missing. The truth is, respect doesn't thrive in noise. It doesn't seek the spotlight. It doesn't compete with egos. Instead, it holds space. It brings a calm, clarity to chaos. So when a heated exchange unfolds, when mockery is thrown like a grenade and everyone braces for the explosion, respect can walk in and disarm the whole moment without saying a word. That moment didn't belong to cleverness or dominance. It belonged to restraint. It belonged to the quiet dignity of someone who knew the difference between being feared and being respected. In a world where people are quick to clap back, to match insult with insult, there's something disruptive about someone who chooses a different response. Not because they don't have the fire to fight, but because they've learned that not every battle is worth burning a bridge. When mockery becomes the currency of debate, the room gets smaller. It collapses into a place where wit replaces wisdom, and performance overshadows principle. People stop listening and start waiting for the next punchline. But when respect enters, it demands more from the room. It raises the level of discourse. It shifts the audience from passive consumers of entertainment to active witnesses of integrity. That shift may be subtle, but it's undeniable. In that moment, the energy changed. Not because someone shouted, but because someone refused to. That refusal to stoop to mockery didn't weaken the stance. it strengthened it. It said, "I'm not here to play games. I'm not here to trade barbs. I'm here to stand for something bigger than myself." That kind of composure isn't taught in debating class. It's earned through life, through experience, through an understanding that real influence doesn't come from silencing others, but from modeling what leadership actually looks like. Respect, in its truest form, is not about hierarchy or titles. It's about presence. It's about how someone carries themselves under pressure, how they respond when provoked, and how they hold their ground without becoming hostile. That kind of presence unsettles people who rely on chaos to gain control. It makes the room take notice, not because it demands attention, but because it makes everything else seem smaller by comparison. The person who chooses respect in a disrespectful moment isn't weak. They're playing a longer game. They understand that while applause fades and headlines change, character sticks. People remember the ones who didn't flinch, the ones who didn't fight dirty just to win fast. They remember the moments when civility re-entered the conversation and reminded everyone that power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it simply stands. What makes that choice so impactful is how rare it's become. In today's climate, people are trained to retaliate, to protect their pride at all costs. But those who are truly secure, who know who they are and what they stand for, don't need to retaliate to feel powerful. They don't need the last word. Their silence, their presence, their refusal to engage in pettiness becomes the message, and, in that moment, the room saw it. The shift was immediate. The laughter that mockery tried to generate died out. The energy flattened. The attention moved, not toward the person who had tried to steal it, but toward the one who reclaimed it simply by choosing grace. That's the power of respect. It doesn't argue. It doesn't retaliate. It just stands there, unmistakable, undeniable. That kind of moment lives on longer than the words that sparked it. It gets replayed, not because it was outrageous, but because it was human. Because it spoke to something deeper, something people crave but rarely see. Someone who chooses strength through stillness, composure over chaos, and respect in the face of ridicule. In the end, what stood out was not the sharpness of the mockery, the volume of the room, or the performance of political bravado. It was the quiet strength that followed. In a space where confrontation is often mistaken for courage, the most memorable moment came from composure, not conflict. The gesture that halted the escalation did not rely on noise, but on presence. It didn't need applause or validation to carry meaning. It simply was. This moment reminded everyone that strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it walks in softly, stands firmly, and says everything without uttering a single word. That kind of strength isn't built overnight. It's forged in lived experience, in the lessons passed down through generations, in values that don't shift with the trends or the pressure of the spotlight. It's the kind of strength that knows when to speak, and more importantly, when to stay silent. Mockery may win seconds of attention, but it rarely wins hearts. It entertains, but it doesn't inspire. It grabs the moment, but loses the message. Respect, on the other hand, may not trend, but it stays. It echoes beyond the moment. It leaves an impression that time doesn't easily erase. And when respect is modeled in a moment of provocation, it teaches more than any lecture ever could. What people witnessed wasn't just an exchange of words or gestures. They saw a contrast between ego and grace, between performance and principle. It became clear that one path sought to diminish while the other aimed to rise above. And when all was said and done, the lasting image was not of the person who mocked, but of the one who chose dignity. In a world hungry for quick reactions and viral clips, this moment served as a quiet counter-narrative. It proved that power doesn't always come from outshining others. It often comes from standing alone when it would be easier to lash out. And that kind of power, rooted in restraint and self-respect, can't be undone by a single insult or public jab. Ultimately, this wasn't just a story about disagreement or political tension. It was a story about character, about how people choose to respond when they are tested, and about how, sometimes, the most impactful statement is the one not spoken, but embodied. That moment will be remembered not for the mockery that tried to steal the spotlight, but for the quiet act that reclaimed it with grace.